welcome back to my Halloween month reviews. This time around, we are covering a movie that also relates to some ghosts, but mostly relates to some demons. And that film I'm talking about is Insidious, directed by James Wan and stars Byrne, Patrick Wilson, and Shaye. It's about a little kid named Dalton, played by Simpkins, and all of a sudden, after seeing something in the attic, he goes into a coma. And his mother, Renee, played by Byrne, is seeing ghosts everywhere in her new house, and she doesn't understand why or how. And both her and her husband, Josh, played by Patrick Wilson, soon find out that something is keeping Dalton in a coma, something malevolent and sinister. I remember watching this film on TV at one point. I did not see it in theaters. I only watched it on TV after the third film was released in theaters because I wanted to see what all the fuss is about. I wanted to see why a lot of people loved the first Insidious film. And this movie did do pretty well when it first came out, even though it didn't do the best when it first came out because it's got like a 68% on Rotten Tomatoes, even though critics from 2011 still really enjoyed that film. And it did later on get more Insidious films in the future, where it got a second film, which I do think is actually pretty good. The third is okay, the fourth is pretty bad, and the fifth is very mediocre and And this movie also counts as one of the first Blumhouse films to be released before they became a big movie studio in the film industry. And when I first finished Insidious, I remember being terrified and frightened by what I was seeing in the film, in particular with one character that they would show throughout the film, which we'll mention him later. And it's one of the rare horror films for me that still gives me chills and it creeps me out every time I watch it to this day. And despite the fact that this movie is PG-13, it still manages to get away by being as terrifying as an R-rated horror film, thanks to James Wan for directing the film and Leigh Whannell for writing it. Even though this film does, for the most part, focus on Rose Byrne's character, Renee Lambert, who sees all these ghosts happen around her, but her husband Josh can't see them. She's the only one that's seen a lot of these ghosts around her. And then she later gets some people to help her with that, like these two spec guys played by Angus Sampson and Leigh Whannell himself, where both of them set up their cameras and their tools to see these ghosts for themselves, and when they eventually do see ghosts for themselves, they later get help from Elise Rainier, played by Shaye, who is really good in this film, and she is one of the best parts in this film and in the rest of the franchise that she's also in. Even in some of the weaker Insidious films, she definitely makes those films worth watching with her performance and her character as well, because she is a psychic. She can see ghosts around her as well, and she can figure out what type of ghosts they are and what problems that they have. And she goes through some pretty dark stuff throughout this film. I'm not going to get into spoilers, but she does some things throughout this film that'll make you go, geez, she is brave at this. Like, that's a pretty risky thing for her to do. It's dangerous, but she does it. And she also knows some things about what to do in the afterlife. I'm not gonna say what they are. I'm just gonna leave it at that because I'm not gonna get into like some big spoilers for this video. And both Rose Byrne and Patrick Wilson are great in the film as well. They play parents that are trying to be there for Dalton even when he's in a coma, and they do feel like a realistic and grounded couple when they're dealing with issues in their lives and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And for the first half of the film, Renee is the one that's trying to figure out what these ghosts are, and she's trying to figure out how to get rid of them, and Josh is just trying to let Dalton's illness sink in with him and try not to let it get to his head that much, even though he's supposed to be there for both Dalton and Renee. So the acting here is really solid. Everyone here does a really good job. Even Simpkins does a good job as Dalton, even though he spends most of the film lying down because his character is supposed to be in a coma. And I also got gotta mention James Wan's directing for this film. I think he does a really good job with this film, and it's mostly because of his earlier work on some horror films like Saw, for instance, and he knows the kind of horror that he puts in his films. And he's later able to carry it on with other films, like he also did Insidious Chapter 2, and later did the first two Conjuring films as well. So as you can tell, he is not a stranger to horror films, nor is Leigh Whannell, who also wrote Saw and wrote this film as well, and is now later on known for writing and directing films like he also did Insidious 3, and of course directed movies like Upgrade and The Invisible Man. So as you can tell, both James Wan and Leigh Whannell have been doing horror movies together for a long time. Of course, another thing I gotta mention about this film that I love is the score by Joseph Bashara. He does a really good job at making the score feel unsettling and chilling. Like when you see something creepy that's about to happen, you get this creepy violin music in the background that's supposed to give you chills. And he does a fantastic job with the score, and for me, it is one of the best parts of this movie. And another thing that I love about the music that doesn't relate to Joseph Bashara is the way they use Tiny Tim's song Tiptoe Through the Meadow. And if I'm gonna be honest, I'm not gonna stop thinking about Insidious when I hear this song play in either a radio in a car, or when someone's listening to it on their phone, or when I'm listening to another song by Tiny Tim called Living in the Sunlight, which is used in one of the first episodes of SpongeBob. Now let's talk about the one thing that is a common issue for most horror movies like this, because this movie is very similar to other horror movies like Poltergeist and The Exorcist, because you have some kind of entity that's haunting a family, doing something terrible to one of their kids, and they get some help from some specialists that know about ghosts and how to get their kid back. And it relates to some of those characters being possessed by ghosts as well. You can definitely see those similarities to those films, but the reason it works in this film is because of the execution with the practical effects and the makeup, the way the film is shot, the way they set up the stakes and the characters throughout the film. The way they do it here makes it feel different and makes it feel like it's being its own thing without feeling like a copy of those films. And the directing from James Wan and the writing from Leigh Whannell help make this film feel more different and feel like its own film. And that should show you that both James Wan and Leigh Whannell know their stuff when it comes to horror, especially when it comes to the jump scares in this film. And to be honest, when I watch a horror film, I'm not easily scared by jump scares, because most of the time, horror movies use jump scares in a very cheap way, meaning that they have a creepy scene that's supposed to be set up and we're supposed to feel terrified about what's going on, and then you see something jump out of nowhere and you hear that loud jolt of music in the background, when in reality it's just a friend just pulling a prank on a certain character, which isn't very scary. They just wasted a loud jolt of music for a false jump scare. And another thing that makes those jump scares bad is that they're very predictable. You can easily predict which jump scare is gonna happen in one scene, making both of those issues ruin the tension and suspense in those films. Like the first Ouija, for instance, that movie had some very false jump scares that really ruined the tension, and that's one of the reasons why Ouija, among many reasons, sucked when that movie came out. And yes, the jump scares in this film can be predictable too, but the best thing about them is that they are not false. They feel like real jump scares, because when those jump scares happen, they're from a ghost or a demon that would appear in the film, which that should show you that this movie knows how to handle those jump scares right and to make them feel more terrifying for the audience, which a good example happens halfway into the film, which this is the part where it's not really a spoiler because a lot of people do know about this moment, and it's supposed to be a big part in the film and one of the best things about horror movies. But if you're very concerned about spoilers, or if you don't want to know what the jump scare is because you're probably not into horror movies, then skip to this time if you don't want to know. But if you've seen this film already, you are good to watch the rest of the review and hear me talk about one of the best jump scares in history. So there's a scene where both Renee and Josh are at a dinner table with Josh's mom, played by Barbara Hershey, where where she has a dream about her being in their house, and she sees that both Josh and Renee are asleep, and she sees that Josh is asleep too, but she also sees that there is a creepy shadow in his room that makes crackling sounds when he moves his arms around, and he tells her that he is a visitor and he wants Dalton for his dark reasons that we of course don't know what they are, but we can get a clear idea of what they are just by looking at him. And then after she finishes the story, she says that she still remembers the sound that this demon makes, and when she hears that sound, she sees that the demon is all of a sudden behind Patrick Wilson. That is definitely one of the scariest jump scares I have ever seen in a horror movie. I remember when they were talking about the dream that she had, and when it cuts to that demon, I freaked out. Like, I was terrified seeing that. And a fun thing about the demon creature is that he is played by Joseph Bishara, the composer of this film. And in case if you're wondering what this demon is called, he is called the Lipstick Demon. Why is he called that? Because not only is it on IMDb, but the composer of this film himself did all the makeup himself with red lipstick. And a lot of people have kind of made fun of this makeup for a while because he looks like Darth Maul from Phantom Menace. I mean, can you see the similarities? Now, despite the fact that I do love Insidious, and I obviously think that this is the best film in the Insidious franchise, but I will admit this isn't a perfect movie. I already covered like the story being a little similar, but I can still give it a pass for that. But I can give this film a pass because of the execution for the story and its characters and its jump scares, and it has a creepy villain, so I can give the film a pass for the story being familiar, but I will not give this film a pass for having some cringy, subtle humor. Now, this movie isn't trying to be a comedy at all, but when it tries to add in like some parts of the humor just to lighten the mood for the audience, especially when it comes to the spec characters that are supposed to deliver some of the humor, there are times where it can feel flat and ruin the tone. Like at one point, one of them sees like a cool action figure that he thinks that should have been kept in its packaging. Like that kind of thing was supposed to be funny. I mean, it just didn't work. So when it comes to the humor in this film, that is like one of the weaker parts of the film that I think they should have done better if they wanted to add like some subtle humor just to lighten up the mood for the audience, or maybe just don't have the humor at all, because this movie's perfectly fine without it. Another issue is that there's one scene where ghosts are trying to get in this one room and two characters try to barricade this room trying to keep the ghosts out, and I was thinking like, why would you barricade this whole door? These ghosts can pretty much walk through walls and doors. That was kind of like a little pointless part to add in some more suspense and tension. Insidious is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It has a story that at times is familiar but still well executed. It has interesting and compelling characters. It has great jump scares and very chilling moments, and it has a very terrifying villain. If you've never seen any of the Insidious films before, I do recommend starting with this film. You don't necessarily have to watch all of the Insidious films. You're good with just watching this film, as well as the second film. I actually like the second film. Is it as good as the first film? No, it does have some issues, but I actually enjoy it. I'm gonna give Insidious an A-. So guys, if you have seen Insidious, what did you think about it? Do you think it's a great horror film and you still think it is the best Insidious film? Or do you think that this film hasn't aged well and it has a lot of issues and you didn't enjoy it because of the predictable story? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video and my Halloween month review so far, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing, because it helps my channel grow. Hit the notification bell so you know what other videos I'm posting. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.